All right, so good day, everyone. It's a pleasure always being here. Thank you for always showing up for our trainings, study group sessions. And I want to say, sorry, it's not something I take for granted. So I'm glad he showed up today. And we are going to just advance on the course material that we have. Today we have a lot of material to cover, so I just go straight into what we have for the day. All right. I think today we're going to look at how to perform advanced analytics with uh, your Power BI, and we're going to look at a couple of analytics techniques, and we are going to also look at machine learning with Power BI. I hope we can do justice to that today, but I'm just going to try. Okay, so here we are. I have two data sets that I'm working with. The first is this data set called statistical data, and you will find that in our Google Drive as always. And this is just basically a CRM report showing customer complaints, the customer service officer that handled it, and the processing time, what in minutes. All right. So that's what this data just shows, and it has quite a number of entries, about 122 of them. Okay. So the second data set is another publicly available data set that I got from Kaggle, and it's just the data set of the beer production in Austria between 1956 and 1995. All right, so you see the month here, and I've taken the liberty to insert the month number, and yeah, that's basically what I inserted in here. But normally the original data set was just the month and the beer production for the month. So you see quite a number of entries there. Sorry, I have to scroll this way, and you see we had up to 1995 October. Oh no, October, that should be August 1995. All right, so those are the two data sets that I'm working with, and I've imported those two data sets to save our time in Power BI. And what I have here is the first data set, so I'm just going to go to data view. So you'd see the first table, that's the complaint reports, the customer inquiry complaints, the customer service officer and processing time. And this is also another table, that's the beer production. Now, these two data sets are totally unrelated. And you can see, if you look at the relationship, there is no relationship at all. So I have just imported them together for convenience sake. But normally what I should have done would have been to have each of them, in its own separate file. But I'm trying to save the time I'd use to just keep opening and closing one report and the other, especially if I have to juggle the two of them in the course of what we have to do right now. So yeah, all right. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go straight to what we have. Now, sometimes you want to perform some form of statistical report on your data, and you probably, if you're a Python user or in R or some of these other tools like Minitab, SPSS, you have like unlimited or almost unlimited opportunities to do statistical analytics. But what we see is that in Power BI, there is some form of limitation, all right? Because obviously Power BI is a visualization tool, but it has not been imbued with a lot of statistical, prowess. So that's why there are a lot of integrations that Power BI allows you to do. You can have integrations with Python, even though I really think this integration is still very messed up. You can have integration with R and a couple of things you can do. From my experience using Power BI, I would rather do everything in Python and not bother bringing into Power BI. All right. So, but again, there are some workarounds, but it's just that Power BI, Python in Power BI is very limited, very limited. All right, um, so let's just assume that you want to do a histogram, all right? And you want to produce a histogram of maybe processing time, okay? And you know, a histogram is like a statistical visualization that shows continuous data arranged in beans. So while you look at your, when you look at your visuals, you really do not have histograms. So you have two options, either to improvise or you go look at the app source store if you can get a histogram, all right? But most organizations don't allow this because of security issues, because Microsoft really, well, they do verify all the apps in the App Store, but some of them could conflict with the security policies of your organization and could be a problem for you. So because of that, it's usually advised you do a workaround or you create your own visuals from the scratch using JavaScript, which is the default um, method of creating visualizations, this kind of visualizations, all right, in Power BI. So since we are not in the mode to create our own visual from scratch just to be able to view a histogram, we are just going to go straight to improvising. So the first thing you want to do when you want to improvise is to get the target column. So in this case, the report I want to produce is like a histogram of the processing times. All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click on this, and then I'm going to say create a new group. So what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to bin, because histograms exist like that. They exist in bins, all right? So I'm just going to try to create a bins. I'm just going to call this processing bins. And the group type obviously is a bin, but there are other things in this, but what we want is really a bin. All right. And then there are two ways we can bin a particular piece of data like processing time. We can create a number of bins. In this case, we'll just say 110 bins, and then we'll ask Power BI to fit all the data points in that column into 10 groups, all right? So you would notice that this is automatically done by Power BI, all right? And I really cannot do anything to it. I can't delete, I can't do all of that to it. So, but I could say, you know what? I want by the size of bins. So I could tell Power BI, group this thing for me into bins of fives. So I could just change this to 5. Okay. And when I do this, so what I'm telling Power BI is begin at 0, group each of the bins to 5. All right. So what it does is it's just groups everything into 5. Now I'm just going to click on OK. So when I do that, I will have a new column in my Power BI table. That's this complaint reports table. And you'll see, yep, the processing bins report. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to just take a clustered column chart or any of the bar charts that I like, but I like this clustered column chart. And I'm just going to take this processing bin here to make my axis, and I'm going to put the processing time in the values. All right, so great. So here we are. This is my histogram. So you notice that it shows me like, so I could now see the distribution if I plot a bell-shaped curve, all right, around that. So that's what we do with the histogram. Okay, so there are other ways, like I said, you can walk around getting your area under the curve, but like I said earlier, Power BI is not really a statistical tool. So it's just going to be a lot of work, just, improvising and improvising and improvising, right? So that said, you can just get a basic histogram this way. So I'm just going to delete this visual. Now, another thing you might want to do is you might want to get a top N, maybe top 10 or top 5 or whatever, all right? Now, this is a very simple, straightforward thing you can do. You can either do that through a visual, or you could do that with a DAX measure. But my favorite is using the visuals because it's just straightforward and you don't need to write a lot of complex measures that might, need a lot of debugging. So what I want to do right now is I want to find the top 10 customer inquiries. So I'm just going to put that in here. And then I want to calculate that by the processing time. All right. So you would notice that what has happened is that Power BI has given me a count of the processing time. So it's going to say, okay, how many times did this word matching, this problem appear? So if you look at this, if you look at the tooltip, it just tells me 30 times. So out of the about the 120 complaints that were received, matching featured 30 times. Balance information featured 25 times. Billing complaints featured 18 times. Credit card cancellation request featured 13 times. That might be all you want to get, all right? But just in case that's not what you get, maybe you want to see the cumulative time that has been spent on each of these items, each of these complaints, then you're going to come here and change the value field from count, which is this, to sum. All right, so when you do this, you'll notice that it changes, and you probably will notice that some have also dropped positions. Why? Because though like for matching, it had a high number of times, but it had a high number of occurrences, but the time it takes to solve a matching problem is just little. So that's why the sum, it's 385, all right? And it's now like the 5th on the pecking order in this list. So what we have here is billing at the top, all right? And it's 617.95 minutes that was spent in that month for billing complaints. So now I may decide to say, okay, you know what? I want a top 5. I want to know what are the top 5. Whenever you put a visual, one of the things Power BI tries to do is to create a filter context. I talked about filter context a while ago, with which it does your visuals for you. All right. So once it has applied that filter context on these visuals, you'll notice that in the filters pane, you'll see under filters on this visual, you see various options. All right. You see it's telling you that what I'm showing you is being filtered by the customer inquiry and complaints and the sum of the processing times. So since I want to get the top 5 processing times, all I need to do is just to come here, which is the processing time, sum of processing time. And I'll click on this and I would see, okay, no, let me use this. I think what I want to get is the top 5 complaints that handled that were handled, based on the processing time. So when I click on this, it automatically brings out the kind of filtering I can do on this data. So I'm just going to click here, and you'll see there are different kinds of data, different kind of field operations I can do here. I could do a top N filter. So I'm just going to click on top N. So it's going to ask me what I want to do here. I'm going to say I want to show the top 5 items. All right, but I can't still do anything to this because you can see it's not allowing me to apply the filter. The reason is simple, because I need to add the data field that I want to, classify all of this by. So I'm just going to take the processing time and drag it into this field. So again, you'll see that the default is sum, is count, but what we are looking at is the sum of the processing time. So I'm just going to change this to sum, and then I'm going to tell Power BI to apply the filter. So it filters away all the other ones and just leaves the top for me. All right, so these are the top 5. Now, I could play around this data a bit more if I want to. All right, but really that's just how to go about getting the top end on your visuals. And one of the visuals that we talked about the other time is the slicer visual. All right, and let me just delete this. Okay, and so one of the visuals we talked about the other time are the slicer visuals, and what they do is that they help slice a particular piece of data or a visual. They just provide some extra enhancements. All right, so I'm just going to display a bit of how to use slicers because I've really not touched that here for a while. So I'm just going to add a slicer here, and this is the placeholder for the slicer. So it's asking me to select what I want to slice by. All right, so I'm just going to use customer service persons, and I'm going to put that in the field. And you notice I have all the customer service persons and the register here. Now I could decide what kind of slicer I want. So I could make it a list or a drop down. I could do this, and then the slicer becomes a drop down. All right, and then I could make this a list. And then when I come to this place in the format, I could also make some amendments to this place. Now, usually one shortcut is to just type what you want to do in here. So let's say I want to increase the font size. I'm just going to type size so that font options can come out, and I could increase, but this is for the header. So this is for the items and the slicer, so that it could become a bit more bold. All right, that saves you stress of having to look for where the item you want to amend is. So you look for selection controls. If you want to be able to multi-select with present control, you can do that. You can also insist on single selection, and then you can also say you want to add the select all button in the case that it comes out here that enables you to select all of them. But I really do not want to do that. Okay, so another thing you could do is you can change the slicer orientation. All right, and that will be on the let me just check for it. Okay, great. It's under general. Okay, so instead of this vertical orientation, I probably want it horizontal. So the moment you do the horizontal, it looks like this. And you want to make sure that it's responsive. So yeah, so responsive on. So what the responsive does is it keeps changing the shape when you drag it so that so that your slicer doesn't look funny. All right, so here we are. Now when you click on this visual, let's say if you click on this Dennis, you'll see, so it filters off everything Dennis. Click on Hanks, it brings out everything related to Hanks. Same for Marcel, same for Natalie, and Dawn, and Karen, and Meg. All right, so you see the slicers begin to filter all of this. But again, you can decide, you know what, I don't want this visual to interact with any other visual. All right, so I could decide, okay, so just going to go to that should be view, not a view. Just a second. Where is that? Okay, yeah, formats. Formats. I'm just going to go to formats. All right, so I'm going to click on edit interactions and okay, no, sorry, but I have to go to the visual that I want. So this is it. Then I would have to click on formats and edit interactions. So what it does is when I click on this, it brings out this sign here. This sign means do not filter. This sign means filter. So if I click on this here, I'm saying, hey, I don't want this slicer to be able to filter this visual anymore. So you notice that as I click, it doesn't respond anymore. All right, but if I want to change it again, I could just come here and click filter. So when I do this, it says, okay, guy, begin to filter again. So it begins to respond again. All right, so that's about it on visuals. You could explore further for yourself, and that'd be great. So another thing that we've discovered people want to do with Power BI visuals is they probably want to run some form of either anomaly detection, clustering, or all of that. Now, sometimes the temptation is to do it with a scatter plot and, you know, do some AI hocus pocus, but there's really a better way. Because if you try to use a scatter plot, all right, to show two pieces of data, what will happen is probably might say, okay, show me anomalies or show me the clusters. It might not be as good as when you use a full-blown machine learning, sorry, in Power BI to do this. So what I'm going to do is, in the course of this session, probably I'm going to try to do some ML, anomaly detection and all of that, so that we could compare both and see how it works. All right, so this is what I'm going to do next. I'm going to try to do time series. Now, time series, all of these things that we're trying to do now fall into the AI domain. We're trying to project, all right, based on some machine learning algorithms. So time series is that I have a couple of reports for past months, and then on the basis of a couple of things, I'm trying to now project into the next maybe 5 months, the next 10 months. Now, how does it work? Very simple. There are about 3 things that one has to check for in every time series. The first is seasonality. And there are different ways to pull out those things. There are different equations you have to know, all right? The different techniques, there's ARIMA, SARIMA, and all of that. Now, sorry. So what you want to now do is you want to know all those calculations ahead of time, but Power BI makes it easy for you in the sense that it just helps you do the time series calculation, without stress. All you just need to do is just feed in the data set, and then it will do the calculations for you. So let's feed in the data into the report. Now, for this, I'm going to use this monthly beer production because for you to do a time series, you need a lot of data points from previous periods, all right? Because the more the data point, the better the chances that you have a more robust projection rather. Okay, so I'm looking at this bear production model, and usually if you want to run a time series, a line chart is the best visual because line charts are just best for anything that has to do with time, over time, comparison over time. You want to show growth over time, you want to show anything over time, really. Line charts are your go-to chart. All right. So since I've put in my line chart placeholder here, I'm going to put in the month here because this is the month number basically. And I'm going to put the monthly beer production in the values. So it's going to give me a straight line. Oh no, okay, but this is the problem. What it's doing right now is that you would see that it's giving me a count. Now, obviously, if you look at the data sets that we are working with, you'll notice that for month one, there's only one record in the system for bear production for that month, all right? So obviously, it will give you a count of one. Same for month two, one. Same for month three, one. So that's why it's a straight line, just straight line like that. But that's not really what we want. So what we want is we want the value itself, which when you want the value that is showing there to show, what you do is a sum. So just click on the sum and it gives us the the correct line chart. So we can see the flow already by looking at this. You can see the seasonality trends. You can see how things go. But then you want to add a time series line. So whenever you want to do any of all those advanced analytics, you come to this pane called analytics. All right. So there are different things you can do here. You can add a trend line, you can add a Y constant line, X constant line, all right, median percentile line. You can even find anomalies, okay? But what I'm going to do right now, what I just want to do is, I just want to do a forecast, okay? So I'm just going to click on this, and then I'm going to say I want to add this forecast, and how many periods do I want? Maybe I want to forecast the next 20 periods based on this. All right, there's the next 20 points, and ignore last. No, I don't want to ignore any points. I wanted to calculate everything. And because this is a statistical calculation, obviously the issue of confidence intervals coming, so I'm just going to leave it at 95%. And then it's asking me, do I have any convictions about the seasonality? But really, I want Power BI to calculate all of that. So I'm going to leave it at auto. All right, so I'm just going to click on apply and here. So Power BI has calculated the next 20 data points for me. And you can see their forecasts. And you can see, as usual, the upper boundary and the lower boundary based on the confidence interval. We have to report this as a plus or minus. So plus or minus this, plus or minus this, plus or minus this. So that's where we have it for our time series. All right. Okay, so the next visual I want us to look at is AI visuals. They're also called AI visuals, basically. They're called AI visuals, or there are three of them that are of interest to us. So the first is the Q&A. The second is the decomposition tree, and then the third are the key influencers. So we're just going to look at all of this, and we will proceed to the next thing we want to do. All right, so let's do this. Let's just go straight up to the first one, which is the Q&A visual. So I'm just going to click on this, and the Q&A visual is going to pop up here. Basically, what this visual does is very simple. All right, when you click on this, it asks it asks you to feed in a natural language query into what you're trying to do. So you could actually click on, say, get me the average processing time. All right, and it tells you it's 24.84. And as usual, we've proven this to be correct, most times, not most times, basically all the time, except when your measure has a problem, when you want to prove whether it's correct or not. For example, if there's a problem in your tables or the relationships, obviously, you might have a difference in the number that this thing calculates for you versus what you get by your measure. All right. So, but this is basically what this visual does. The visual shows anything really. All right. It shows anything. You can make any natural language query here. So I could say top sorry, top 10 top, okay, so I could use top complaints by processing time, all right? And then it brings this for me, but I could even do this. I could say top customer inquiry. Let me put top 10 customer inquiry and complaints. Now you can see what it does for me is to produce a bar chart for me, all right? And this is actually the future of Power BI, because as we proceed more to the world of auto ML, auto machine learning, where they're trying to reduce the barriers to entry, you don't have to know a lot of code. Like, to achieve this in Python, you really have to write a lot of code, right? And Power BI has the GPT-3 transformer engine embedded into it, so it makes it very easy to ask natural language queries and get results. Where Power BI is going is a situation where you wouldn't have to write DAX. All you just need to do is you write what you want to achieve. This time, not just a visual, this time it could be a function, it could be anything you want to achieve. And once you write it in the natural language query, Power BI just does it for you. Now it's there already, it's already it's already available right now, but it's not in general availability. I think it's still a test. All right. So this is the future of Power BI. Now, another visual that you might want to use, another AI visual, might be a decomposition tree. So what is a decomposition tree? It just shows you how things are made up of and how they let me use the word decompose, right? But that's not the right word I should use. So let me put this processing time here. All right. So it's telling me that we received 122, yeah, that was the total number of inquiries that we have. That's the count. But again, as usual, if that's not what you want, you can always change it to what you want. All right. So then what it wants is I should tell it how I want to explain this. And this is where that decomposition comes in. So decompose this thing for me into how the inquiries came in. So I put that here, and then you notice there's a plus here. So when I click on this plus, it's asking how do I want to show it? High value, low value, so I'm going to say high value. And then it's going to put the highest value up first and then the lowest value down. All right. So I could further decompose this by saying, you know what, decompose this further by the customer service person that handled each of the inquiries. So again, you'll notice some pluses in each of these. By the time I just click on one of the pluses, high value again, it expands everything for me. So it tells me here, if you look at this, Dan and Marcel have both 6, Dennis has 5, all of that. So you'll see that it's telling us that out of this 30, that was the highest. Marcel was like the highest of all of this, contributed the highest, followed by Don, all right, and followed by this. So that's how it decomposes into each of the factors that you keep asking it to explain by. So this is a very straightforward visual, and I could just delete this so that I could add one more. And then this third visual are called key influencer visuals. Again, what's a key influencer visual? It's an XY visual. It just tries to show you what are the main causes. All right. So I would say again, I want to analyze the processing time here. All right. And then I would say I want to explain it by the customer service person that handled it. All right. So it's going to run the analysis. and then no influencers found. So basically what it's saying is, hey, we, from our statistical analysis, I think it's a regression algorithm it runs there, that we do not see any relationship between the person that handles the inquiry and the inquiry itself. So what that means is that whether it was done or Marcel, there is no particular influence factor we can trace. We can't say, okay, if it's done that is handling this, we are going to project that he will be able to do this better. No, all right. So same thing if we say explain by the inquiry type, we'll see if it says, okay, so great. Now let me increase the size of this visual so that it it becomes large. All right. So, okay, so what we see here is that it says what influences processing time to increase when the customer and whatever influences processing time. All right. So it's telling you that one of the things that can actually determine the processing time is actually the type of complaints. And from its analysis, it has discovered that, hey, customer processing time, when it's customer processing time, when it's credit card cancellation, it tends to take a little more time, or it tends to affect the processing time than the other ones. All right. So that's basically what this key influencer visual does. It's just an ML visual that, or an AI visual, if you like to call it that, that tries to find out the relationship between two variables. So automatically it makes the first variable the X variable, and then the other one the Y variable. So it tries to use the X variable, all right, to explain the Y variable. So in this case, the processing time is the Y variable, and it's trying to use this customer inquiry time as the X variable to explain what happens, so that you can probably even have a regression lines. Okay, when customer complaints is this, we project that it will take so and so time, to do that. So that's basically what happens in here. All right. So I think for now we have covered everything that we need to cover under AI visuals. Let's go to AutoML in Power BI. So for that, I'm just going to, let me delete this visual. So for that, I'm just going to go to my browser, log into my, I'm going to log into my powerbi.com, that's a Power BI service. And then on this part too, I have my GitHub. So not much data sets in there, but I hope to load this over the break, all right? Because I have a lot of projects to load in here. So, but I'm just going to pick one or two data sets that I can work with, all right? So I would start by creating a workspace, but I've already created one. All right. So, but if you want to create a new workspace, it's very easy. All right. Just come to this place. You can create a new, just a second. Okay. You see create a workspace here. All right. And when you're done creating the workspace and supplying all of that, it's going to appear here. Okay. So I've already created this workspace, and I'm just going to go straight to the workspace. Now, if you notice, you'll see that it has a premium, right? And that's because I'm trying out the premium Power BI premium features. You have a 60-day trial, because the ML and a couple of other things that you need to run advanced machine learning are only available in premium. And on when this premium expires right now, I'm going to have to start paying Microsoft 20 USD per month to retain this premium rights. All right. If not, I won't be able to have access to this workspace, because it was created user premium per user content. All right. So what I want to do right now is okay, let's just explore these data sets before we start using this machine learning in AutoML in Power BI. Now, what you have here is just a set of data that, okay, no, let me not use the validation. Let me use the real one, prediction. Okay. So what you have here is 109 lines of data, and it has four columns. The first is TV, radio, newspaper, and the last is sales. So this is what this is basically trying to find out. This is the amount based on the record per month. Okay, so for this first month, this was what was spent on TV, this was what was spent on radio, this was what was spent on newspaper. This was the sales that came in. Same for the second month, same for the third month. And we have this record for about 109 months. All right. So what we're trying to do now is we're trying to now project to see, based on what has happened so far, we want to get a relationship. And that's what regression basically does. It tries to get a relationship, a linear relationship, all right, between variables. So this sales here is called the Y variable, or the dependent variable, all right, or the target variable, depending on what school of thought you belong to. And then these other variables are called explanatory variables or independent variables, all right. The basic thing, the basic idea behind it is to say, hey, this sales is what we try to predict based on these other three, okay? So we're going to have a lot of data points. In fact, sometimes, not sometimes, every time in machine learning, the more the data, the merrier, because the more a computer has to look through the data sets, the better it becomes, the better its prediction abilities become. So if you have 1,000 data sets, you're better off than the person that has just 100 data sets, just like that, because you have a more robust model. I mean, we're in the world of big data, so you should expect that you really need plenty of data to train your computer on what it needs to know to be able to give you a perfect, also not perfect, but near perfect projection. All right. So now we have gotten a hang of this. What I'm going to do right now is I'm going to click on new. All right. For you to be able to do this stuff, you need to create a data flow. And a data flow is different from your regular Power BI data set. But I'm not going to explain data flows a lot right now because number one, it's not part of the requirements for the course. But hey, Helen Ward has an amazing course, all right, on LinkedIn Learning about data flows, and I think sometimes LinkedIn makes it available for free. So it's something I could check up later and then see if I could get a free link to that course or something for you. All right. Or it's something that, especially if you have LinkedIn Premium, you're good. Just go to your LinkedIn Learning, search for Helen Wall's course, Helen Wall on data flows, and amazing content. All right. So I'm just going to click on this data flow, and so when I click on the data flow, what happens is it asks me to create my data flow. All right. There are different ways I could create my data flow. I need to move this. So I could add new tables. I could link from other data flows. And that's one of the things data flows do. Data flows can actually act as templates, and you're encouraged to use them when you do a lot of processing, all right, that are similar to each other. So for example, in this report that I have here, let's assume that I process complaints. I also process some other information that is related or that looks alike, that has the same format. Instead of me having to always do this, come do data cleaning, change this. All I need to do is to create it as a data flow. So what used to obtain in Power Query right now is that when I do this, all I need to do is to just go to the source and append or add to the folder or stuff, and I will run it. But remember, this data set is different from this one. So I don't want to append it because I don't want to have it as same report, but I just want to use the logic in this same report that I have here, the cleaning and all that, and just apply it to this other one. So that way, all I need is a data flow, all right, not Power Query, because Power Query is going to just append the report for it to be able to apply the same logic. But with the data flow, I don't need the Power Query to apply the same logic to it. Once I've created the data flow for this, I can apply that flow for this if the reports are similar, or I have to apply similar steps. So that's basically what data flows do. Okay, so let me just go back to this, and I'm going to say add new tables. All right, so now this is where things start getting very interesting, because right now I cannot add a table from a source of my desktop unless I have OneDrive for Business or some other source. So, but what you notice is that to create this data flow, Power BI still relies on Power Query, but not in the sense of having to, append one file, to the other, just to be able to apply the logic. So in this case, my file here is a CSV file. All right, it's a CSV file. So I'm just going to say I want a CSV file. That's what I'm processing. And now it's asking me for the source. But if you notice, it's asking for either a link to the file or I should upload the file. And if I try to upload it, to ask me, hey, I do not have a license for SharePoint, so I should add a license to browse OneDrive for Business. I have a personal OneDrive account, but it's not OneDrive for Business. And sadly, Power BI is not allowing me use my OneDrive personal account. All right, so I'm stuck with using this. And now I would even have to put the OneDrive link, but again, it says OneDrive for Business or the SharePoint link or some other stuff. If I try to put in a Google Drive link here, it's going to give me an error. Why? Because it's going to tell me some, authorization, what. And any form of connection that I use here, it's not just going to work. So, but the trick, Microsoft allows GitHub. I suspect that is because Microsoft owns GitHub. So I'm going to use my GitHub. All right. So I'm going to click on that raw there, and it's going to bring out the raw CSV file for me. So I'm just going to copy the link that contains the raw CSV file, and I'm going to paste it here. So when I do that, I can click on next, and Power BI would accept that. But apart from that, nothing. All right. So I'll wait for Power BI to populate that, and we'll take it from there. Okay, so here we are. As usual, we'll have all of this, and I'm going to click on transform data because I want to have a look at the data to ensure that there is no error or anything. So if there are any errors, you'll see on the status bar that there are some errors in your, okay, so there are no errors, everything is fine. I also want to make sure that the data types are the right types, all right? So everything is decimal types, fine. So I'm just going to click on save and close. And when I do that, it will create the data flow for me. All right, so I'm just going to call this data flow ML. Okay, let me just call this linear regression data flow. All right, and if I want to put in description, great. But right now, no, I don't want to put any description, so I'm just going to save this. Okay, so Great. So my data flow has been saved. To keep my data up to date, I need to set a refresh schedule. I don't want to do that. All right. So I'll just let it just roll. Okay. So the moment you put in your data flow, you'll notice that something becomes available to you here. Now you can add other tables. All right. We're going to do that later. But you notice that something becomes available here, which is a machine learning model. So now we want to train a machine learning model. Why? Because we want to be able to predict, sales based on how much we spend on TV, radio, and newspapers. So I'm just going to go back here and I'm going to click on get started. So the first thing is asking me is for the table. Where is the table? I'm going to say it's that query table that I just did now. I don't know why I didn't change the name of the table from something and from query to something else, but just know that that's the table we are working with. Okay, so the next thing is asking me for what is the outcome column. Remember, this is the column we're trying to predict the outcome variable or the dependent variable, which is sales. So I'm going to click on sales and I'm going to click on next. So by looking at that outcome variable, it determines, okay, I think what you want to do is a regression. So if that output variable had been a binary number, maybe 0101, or had been something else, it probably would have recommended that we use a binary classifier or some other form of classification algorithms. All right. So, but in this case, because that's detected that it's a continuous number, it says, okay, I think regression is going to work best for you. So I'm going to go with the regression that is suggested, and I'm going to click on next. All right. So the next thing it's going to do is it's going to try to look at the data sets. And this is a very important part of machine learning called feature selection. You know, what happens is that the algorithm has to first look at each of these and see their predictive abilities on sales. And it does that with a principle called correlation. I'm sure you're used to this by now, correlation, R squared, and all of that. So it tries to check the correlation of each of the variables, the independent variables like the amount of spent on TV, the amount spent on radio, and all that, with the output sales. So in this case, it's telling us, hey, newspaper has a very low correlation, low R value, all right, when you compare it with sales. If I select this, it's just going to be noise. It's just going to add noise to my model. So it's suggesting I do not add it back. I always become stubborn, I just add it. But just to flow with Power BI, I'm not going to add it because really it has very little predictive value. So to avoid introducing noise into a model, I'm just going to click on next. All right, so it's asking me now to name and train my model. So I'm just going to name my model. I'm going to name it so I'm going to name the model, let me call this model integrated MLAI. Oh no, let me just not make it too complex. I'm just call it linear, multiple linear regression for integrated MLAI. All right, and if I want a description, I will describe it. Now, here is like a very important part of whatever you want to do, whatever auto ML you want to do in Power BI, and it's the training time. You see, if you select a very short training time, like 5 minutes, Power BI possibly might just have only one iteration over the data set. All right. But if you want a well-trained model, the longer you tell Power BI to train on this model, the better it is. And why? Because there are a lot of techniques that Power BI has to apply. So there is the technique called k-fold validation. There are other techniques, a lot of techniques in machine learning that we use. And that if we're doing it manually on Python or in a Jupyter notebook or something, we would want this algorithm to do all of that. So, but in this case, we're just going to put 5 minutes. So we think that we want Power BI to just use 5 minutes to look at the data. All right, just for example's sake, because of time. But if I were doing, if I were doing serious machine learning, I probably would allow it 360 minutes. All right, and that 360 minutes is like 5 hours just to train. And this is just a small piece of data. Just imagine I have trained a model that took me about 16 hours. There are some models that take 24 hours to train. All right. Depending on how accurate you want your results to be, because the more it's just like, that's the beautiful thing about machine learning. It looks like human learning. The more you spend time on the material, the more you know about the material, the more you know the nuances, the in and out. It's the same thing for the computer. The more he spends time on the data set, the more he knows about the data sets, the more he plays around with it. So the more he says, okay, you know what? Is it possible that the way this thing was ordered could affect the outcome I'm having? So you know what? I'm just going to shuffle everything. So it will just shuffle this one from being number one to being number two and replace this one as number one. Or it can shuffle it randomly, depending. There are different things it will try to do. And like I said, the more time it spends learning the data, the better your results are. All right. So, but because we really do not have time, I'm just going to click on Save and Train and ask Power BI to just train for 5 minutes, and the wait begins. All right. So it begins to roll, and it begins to roll, and we begin to wait. All right. So we're going to wait for our model to be done. Okay, great. So I think our data set is trained right now, and we can check that. Let's see. Okay, so I think our data set is trained right now. Yep, it's trained. All right, so we have our data trained right now. All right, so if you look at this, you'd see if you want to retrain the model, which we don't want to, um, you'd see another option here, which is to view a training report. And then you see which this one to apply the ML model. You see this one for further options. Yes, info, edit, delete. So let's view the report. First, um, it's going to, sometimes it takes a lot of time. So we wait for it to generate the training report. So sometimes, depending if it's your first use or if the model is quite large or something, it could take up to like 10 minutes to generate. So don't get worked up when you try to generate the report and it's taking time. Okay, great. So we have our model report right now. And from what you can see, it's telling us that our model is 97% accurate in prediction. I wouldn't trust this figure. Why? Because we just trained this model for 5 minutes. But based on what it says, it thinks that, hey, I'm 97% accurate. We're going to test this now by trying to use it to validate we're going to try to use it to validate a validation data set to test this accuracy. And then we're going to see if it's really, really like accurate. All right. So You can learn a lot from the report. You know, you can learn a lot from the reports. Eventually, if you want to, you can get that. All right. So, but I'm just going to go back to this, and then I'm going to say I want to apply this model. So, but it's asking me for a table where it can test the model it just did. All right. That means I have to import another table. Okay, so I'm just going to go to this place and say add table. All right. So as usual, it's going to bring me back to Power Query for me to choose a data source. And then I'm going to choose this data source. But then I'm going to come to this, my ML data sets repo, and I'm going to pull the validation set. Now this validation set, if you look at it, is just about 15 of it, all right, just 15, so that we can validate whether when we apply the regression algorithm here, it will give us these values or something close to it, all right? So this is what I'm going to use. And as usual, I'm going to open the raw file and I'm going to copy this and I'm going to paste it here. All right, I'm going to click on next and it's going to load that. Okay, so I'm going to click on transform data because I want to look at it in Power Query, make sure that there are no null values and everything is okay. So as you can see, there are warnings. And what are the warnings? So it contains errors, contains errors, contains errors. All right. Now, let me see where the errors are. So I'm just going to click on this first one. We like to view the errors in this. No, let me see this other one. Okay, let me just see what the errors are about, really. See whether we can fix it. Oh, okay. So I think we can fix it. It's just a data communication error. So we can fix it. Okay, same for this one. Okay. So I think it's fixing everything at once. Okay, great. The error is fixed. And yeah. All right. So next I'm going to click is save and close. And it's validating my queries to make sure there are no other errors that it needs to deal with. And then once it's done, it will pop up. Okay, so here we are. Our data has been saved, all right? And we have all our details here, all right? So um, now what we are going to do is, if you notice, this thing had to create two data sets, training and testing data. You'll find all of this in the report. it's going to tell you the criteria for which it's created the training data and then the testing data, all right, to test. And if you look at this side we used to test, it had to create like extra columns, which we're going to look at shortly. All right, but the whole idea of splitting data into test and training and testing is to enable Power BI on its own be able to pick the trend, the relationships, correlation factor, and all of that. And then usually it's 80% of the data sets it uses for training. Then on the testing side, it uses about 20% of it. All right. So that's basically what it does. It takes the logic it has applied and then applies to the testing data sets, the 20% of the data that I use to test and try to see if it really gets this prediction. And that is where the confidence really comes from when it predicts right, all right? And that's where that 97% accuracy that it thinks it has, it's there. So we're going to test that accuracy it gave us, and we're going to see whether it's real, okay? So now we have imported our tables, and again, I mistakenly did not change the name of the table from query to whatever in Power Query, but I'm just going to leave it as query for the original table and query one for the validation table that we just got from GitHub here. All right, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back to this machine learning models, and you're going to see apply ML model. So remember, we have our integrated ML AI regression model, and we are going to click on apply this. So it's going to ask us which table do we want to apply it on. So we're going to tell it on query one, okay? So it's going to tell us that in this table query one, we're going to have a new output column, all right, that is going to be added to this table on the side. And I'm going to explain this. Just to save and apply. So the training begins, and once it's done, Power BI will let us know that our data set is good to go. So yeah, I'm going to import this data from Power BI Dataflows. And it's taking some time, but here it is. And this is my Power BI regression data flow, and still trying to boot up. Okay, so now I'm going to select this query one just to look at it. So you can see that this query one is the validation set for the data that we just validated. But now you would see, if I click on this one, enriched, you would see that it has added that column where it did its predictions, all right? So I'm just going to select this one, this enriched one, click on transform data, all right? And so that I can load it into Power Query, make sure it's good to go, and we move it into Power BI to look at it in a bit more details. So yeah, so this is it. It's our TV and all of that. So but I'm just going to take this away because I do not need this column. So remove this. All right. So this is it. So this is the output, the real output that was gotten for the various months, and this is the predicted output. So you can see for the month that the output was 8.6, Power BI predicted 10, 9.7, Power BI predicted 11, 12.5, Power BI predicted 15, Power BI got this one a bit close, this one was a bit close, like that. And I tell you the reason. The reason is simple, because we did not allow Power BI to train very well on the data. So though it had 97% confidence, like I'm going to be accurate 97%, it's not really correct. So if we had allowed it to train more, then the accuracy would have been better than this. All right, so we can be able to predict better than what we have here. So that's how AutoML works in Power BI. You could also try it for classification. If you look at my GitHub, you're going to find that there are, like, this data set here called survival prediction. This one is good for classification examples. All right, so you could practice this, because like this is like predicting the survival of passengers. So passenger class is 1, 2, 3, and to represent first class, second class, and third class. All right. The sex of the passenger, male, the age of the passenger. So some passengers are female too. All right. So this data set did not include all the other non-binary gender, so it's just sex, male and female. We have age here, 30 and all of that, and we have whether they survived or not. So survived is 0 and 1. So survived is 0. No, did not survive is 0, survived is 1. So that's what you have here, either 0 and 1. All right. So obviously, the way this data set is arranged, we have to allow Power BI train very well on it. Why? Because you can see it's just arranged zeros first and ones after that. So we'll have to allow Power BI a lot of time to train on it so that it can reshuffle them, create cross-fold validation, you know, and try to see, okay, what if I shuffle this one and all of that? Will it affect the prediction I'm going to make and stuff like that? All right. So that's about it for AutoML and Power BI. Thank you so much for listening, for being there in today's session. And if there are any questions, we could take it on the Slack channel. All right. And once again, I'm grateful you keep showing up to study sessions. Thank you so much, and see you some other time.